Calliope's Tale by FalcomReynolds. Chapter 5. Dead Blood. Lightning cracked through the clouds overhead, fragments of brilliance crawling across the underbellies of the clouds. No rain fell. "I don't like this," Ianthe murmured, staring up. "This doesn't feel natural."
"How do you mean?"
Miculo, next to her, glanced over. "No storm naturally feels like this." Ianthe reached up, mind brushing the low-hanging clouds. She could taste the sting of electricity in the air, but there was something else underneath it, something she normally didn't feel. "This is not Kalari's work."
"Well, that's frightening,"
Miculo commented, folding his arms.
"But if it isn't Kalari's storm, then whose is it?"
There was a long moment of silence. Ianthe breathed in again, through her mouth, wrinkling her nose up to try and taste the air as best she could. There was a shimmer of electricity on her tongue, the ever-present scent of salt, the coolness of the wind, and a faint, hazy smell. Sweet. Too sweet. The smooth yet abrasive taste of pungent alcohol, softening the slick taste of too sugary honey. She knew that specific scent, that exact flavor, the unnerving, out-of-place smell of honey and absinthe floating like incense on the wind. That was magic, and she knew exactly whose magic it was.
"Alizarin's," she breathed, answering Miculo's. "It's Alizarin's storm."
"What?" Ianthe turned her gaze to her captain.
"He's doing this."
Miculo immediately turned and vaulted up the steps on the prow, up to the bowsprit.
"Eyes on the horizon!"
The crew obeyed his shouted command without question. Ianthe sprinted towards the bow, towards the oncoming storm, and pulled the brass spyglass from her coat pocket. Through the salt-spattered glass, over the gray waves, and through the wind, she could see it. The Heretic, Alizarin's flagship. She could see, even from here, the black lightning leaping out from the deck, chaining the storm to the ship, keeping it under control. The ship seemed to be alone, but it didn't need a fleet behind it to frighten Ianthe to her very soul. Miculo, running by, paused next to her.
"What do you see?"
"It's him. We have to run." The Heretic was headed right in their direction. Ianthe turned and shoved the spyglass into Miculo's hands. "We can't fight him," she said, searching his face. "You know this. I know this. If we are caught in that storm, we will not escape." Miculo took the spyglass and observed the oncoming ship for a moment.
"Oh, damn it all,"
he said, and lowered it. His already pale skin was drained of what little color it held.
"You're right. I wish you weren't."
Ianthe turned to the crew. "About face!" she called out, her voice clear through the rising wind. "Make away from the storm!" They responded again, swarming up the rigging and heaving the sails, turning the tiller. Ianthe felt the midnight sun begin to change course, sweeping away from Alizarin. But it wasn't fast enough. They didn't have enough wind, and the Heretic was flying over the seas faster than any ship should have been able to go. Ianthe knew why, and she didn't like the reason, but that didn't change the fact that they would not be able to outrun it. Miculo realized this too.
"She's too fast,"
he muttered, frowning through the spyglass again. Any pirate worth their salt could see how quickly the Heretic was whipping across the swell, how easily it would catch up to the midnight sun. He lowered the spyglass again, this time folding it and handing it back to Ianthe.
"We're going to need an intervention,"
he said, after a long moment. Ianthe closed her eyes for a moment. Miculo was right. They weren't going to be able to make it out of this mess without a bit of a sacrifice. Alizarin was more than human. He was a practitioner of the old arts, the dirtier, disrespectful arts, the ones that spat in the faces of the gods, hence the name of his wretched ship. He used the souls of people he killed to strengthen his ship's hull, to guide his aim in battle, to summon winds for the sails that pushed more powerfully than any ordinary sea breeze. Without an intervention, the midnight sun was doomed. Ianthe considered her options. Of the goddesses of the sea, which one would save them? Kalari might be able to lend them enough speed to outrun the heretic. She would be the most likely to answer. But Ianthe wasn't sure if any storm she called would be safe from Alizarin's influence and control. Athu might be able to help, but Ianthe wasn't certain what she would do. She'd be rolling the dice on that one. Zoriel would not be useful, as they were in the deep ocean, but she could still try. Perhaps she would be able to call up some unknown spire of coral to block Alizarin's path. And, of course, there was Zikal. No. Too risky. Ianthe would not do that.
Who are you choosing?
Mikulo asked. Ianthe took a breath. Kalari, she said. Hopefully her devotion would be stronger than Alizarin's rotted, corrupted magic. She turned and moved up to the bow, breathing deep. Feel the wind in your lungs, she heard her mother whisper in her memory. Your breath, Kalari's breath. Your voice, her voice. Your words, her words. Become her for a mere moment, and the sky is yours. It was partly a request, partly an order. Ianthe took her coat off and stored it in a nearby chest, then stepped up to the fore railing, putting her hands on the polished wood and planting her feet on the planks. The ship had pulled a full roundabout away from the heretic, away from the storm front. She bucked up and down in the swell, sending spray up all the way to the railing. The wind tugged at Ianthe's hair and clothes. Kalari, she began, and took another breath, feeling the polished metal and wood underneath her rough palms. Goddess of storms, the eternal tempest, I call upon you now. The static tingle crawling along her skin told her Kalari was listening. The smell of rosemary and pepper oil began to permeate the air, the scent of Ianthe's magic. She raised both arms to the sky, beckoning, supplicant. Alizarin, who ensnares the souls of the dead, pursues us. He has conjured a mockery of your works and intends to use it against us. I entreat you now. Give me the power to outrun him. Give us wings of thunderheads, eyes of lightning. Let me guide my ship to safety in your storm. The feeling intensified. Ianthe forged onwards, despite the knowledge that this was about to hurt. A lot. You are the wind in our sails, and so shall I be also. You are the energy in our crew, and so shall I be also. Your thunder is our shouts and cries, and so mine shall be yours. You are... The only warning she had was the sudden sharp, hot smell of ozone in the thick air. A bolt of white lightning broke the world in half as it dropped down and struck Ianthe where she stood, paralyzing her for a moment, sending pain through every inch of her body. She couldn't scream because her lungs wouldn't work, and she couldn't move. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a crew member leap forward, obviously terrified for her. Mikulo grabbed their arm and pulled them back, shaking his head. The crew member glanced at him, then over to Ianthe, then subsided, worry etched on their face. Don't worry, Ianthe wanted to say, wanted to laugh. I've done this before. Slowly, Ianthe felt control of her limbs returning to her. She lowered her arms and examined her hands. Kalari was the goddess who listened most often. Ianthe had channeled the Tempest many times and knew what to expect. As always, she could see flickers of lightning running like living tattoos beneath the surface of her skin. She flexed her finger and felt the electricity in her blood. Now they had a chance. Ianthe reached one hand up and pulled on the sky. This was going to cost her once Kalari left, but it would definitely be worth it. She looked at her crew, at Mikulo, and thought of Calliope in the hold, probably frightened by the noise. She hoped the mermaid was all right. She couldn't know what was happening. She probably thought the world was ending. No, child, she thought, smiling. There will be no end if I can help it. We'll be going now, she said, and called the wind. It answered her in sweeping gusts of stinging rain that slammed down in a dark gray curtain between them and the heretic. The ship shuddered with the force and suddenness of it, though when the rain hit the Ianthe's skin, the drops hissed and steamed and vanished. The midnight sun, in spite of the rain, caught the gale in her canvas and surged forward, breaking through the rapidly deepening storm swell. The movements threatened to toss Ianthe over the front rail into the deep slate-gray waters below. And as she grabbed onto the rail again, she had to remind herself, as her mother had always told her, that channeling one of the goddesses did not make her invincible. She had to keep herself alive. Ianthe focused on the storm that had swirled up from nothing above. It was a cold storm, a swift storm, and Ianthe could tell it would not last long. They had to make the best of this while they had it. But someone was pulling on the storm, and it wasn't her. It felt like a hand brushed across her cheek or back. She whirled, eyes narrowed, trying to pinpoint the sensation. The sweet sense of honey and absinthe again tinged the air. Alizarin. He was closing fast. They weren't moving quickly enough to escape. Ianthe gritted her teeth and pushed the wind. Above, someone cried out. Ianthe's attention snapped upwards. The push was too strong. One of the ropes in the rigging had snapped, cracked across the torso of whoever was up there. Ianthe lessened the push a bit and frantically hoped it wasn't weakening the mast or hurt the crew member too badly. In her moment of distraction, she lost track of Alizarin's souls and of his ship. They escaped her notice in the typhoon. Where were they? Where? Port! Port! No! Starboard! The heretic came from the haze of the rain, like one of the great sea beasts, off the crest of a swell wave, fully suspended, a black and gray shadow like a stony reef, above Ianthe and the midnight sun. She turned toward it, heart in her throat, and reflexively slammed a gust of wind into it, trying to knock it away. For a heart-rending moment, the heretic hung in the air above the midnight sun's prow, threatening to crush her entirely. Then the wind took hold and forced the boat aside, twisting the structure of the ship with the sheer strength of it, and the heretic crashed down into the black waves, its prow shoved to the side. Not enough to keep it from slamming into the sun, but enough to keep it from crushing the sun's hull like a weathered seashell. The heretic cracked into the sun with a power that sent vibrations through the entire hull. Ianthe grabbed onto the railing again and prayed that the mermaid inside her wooden cradle was going to be okay. Mikulo had likely had someone buckle her chest shut, but it would be horrible if it tipped and hurt her. What if... No time to worry about that now. The two ships scraped together with the scream of bending wood as Ianthe furiously tried to send the same wind current in two different directions at the same time. Anything to get Alizarin's horrible, unholy construction away from her, or damage it somehow. She pushed on the heretic's sail, trying to replicate what she'd accidentally done to her own ship just moments before. As she hoped, the crew of the heretic wasn't ready for it. The wind she forced into the sails was too strong. She actually heard, through the rumble and roar of the storm, the heart-stopping sound of canvas tearing. Someone on the other ship screamed, and Ianthe felt them in the air, falling. The wind under her control was violently wrenched away, and she physically staggered to keep hold of it. It was Alizarin, taking a personal hand in the fight. She felt him wrap his soles around the storm and try to pull it from her. The smells of honey and absinthe thickened. No, she would not let that happen. She gripped the railing tight and yanked the storm back, and the two ships scraped past each other, and as they did, she saw him. He was standing at the stern, one hand holding a glass jar full of swirling baubles of dim light, the other on the railing. He looked into her white lightning eyes and smiled. He was wearing the same long crimson coat he'd been wearing when Ianthe had ripped off the patch that marked her as his first mate and thrown it at his feet. He had the same cold, impassive look on his face, the one he had given her when she turned away from his ship and his vile magic. She had later learned that it had been just in time for her. Alizarin was just a few days from his first binding of another gifted human using soul magic, and she would have been next. Her channeling his to use as he pleased. No, she had escaped him not a day too soon. He looked exactly the same. He had not aged, his clothes had not worn, and he had not changed, not a bit since Ianthe had left his crew. Or perhaps not. Alizarin's tight-lipped smile was different from the one she remembered. He was hiding something. "You will not touch my ship," Ianthe snarled through the wind. The smell of pepper oil made her eyes sting.
"It's already mine,"
Alizarin said, and when he opened his mouth she could see behind his white teeth a roiling mass of greenish-black flesh where there should have been a tongue, slick, wet tendrils that writhed together in his mouth. His voice was thick and garbled, warped by the aberration that produced it. Horrified, Ianthe almost lost her grip on the railing, instinctively pulling back. She tried to push the heretic away again, but Alizarin's souls were too numerous, clinging to the storm. She took another breath and began to speak, swiftly and quietly. "Athu, grant me the wisdom to hold your power, and another's in my mind. Athu, grant me the strength of the sea to save my ship. Athu, give me one wave to send them away from us, that we may be free of them. Athu, the sea, the unending expanse, the azure queen, give me the blood of the sea water and a heart of whale song. Let me hold your waters in my hand for a moment." Athu was slower to answer, but Ianthe, fearing the consequences, but fearing Alizarin's certainty more, used Kalari's power to push the call forward. She felt the deep shift of the midnight sun as the ocean answered her, quietly, but with a deep, powerful strength. "Very well," she thought, and let go of Kalari as Athu's presence surged into her mind. Another bolt of lightning came cracking down, this time eschewing the boats and dropping directly into the sea. The storm vanished from Ianthe, and instead she felt the impossibly deep swell of the sea beneath her. She wrenched her hands up, dragging them through the thick air, and forced a rogue wave into the side of the heretic and into Alizarin. He was not expecting it. He stumbled and nearly fell as the water crashed into the heretic's hull, fingers white as he gripped the jar in his left hand deathly tight.
"You wretched cur!"
he snarled, and Ianthe ignored him to slam another wave into the side. She used the current to turn the midnight sun away from her pursuer, and spun the heretic sideways, keeping it floundering in the swell. The waves carried the sun forward, through the storm, and in the mind of the sea, Ianthe could feel the storm above lessening. She could also feel Athu's interest in what was happening, and desperately tried to keep the heretic spinning uselessly under the storm clouds while the sun made her escape. The rain descended and cut the heretic away. It vanished behind them as they were borne forward on unnatural waves. Ianthe felt her channel failing and pushed one last time, clearing the way in front of the sun. The current swept her along, cutting a knife-clean path through the waters, and pulled her to safety, closing behind her to keep her enemies from following. Completely soaked, exhausted, and with Athu's power leaving her, Ianthe stepped back from the railing. She knew her eyes, for now, were a solid deep blue-black, but when Athu was gone, she would return to normal, and it was likely she would fall unconscious. Channeling one of the goddesses was hard enough. Channeling two was an absolute nightmare. "Keep going," she told the crew, as she retrieved her coat and strode towards the hold. "Do not stop for any reason. Keep going. Do not let him catch us. The waters will carry us for a time, but after that it is your responsibility to keep us moving. We must be gone by the time the storms disappear." She made it into the hallway before collapsing.